the Indian subcontinent was subjugated by an island more than 20 times smaller in size. This unimaginable conquest of what would become the jewel in the British crown greatly empowered the British Empire, and by the middle of the 19th century, British rule sparked a new wave of South Asian nationalist movements, the effects of which are still felt to this day. We won't delve too deeply into the consequences of British rule. Instead, our goal is to evaluate the specific actions taken by the British and Indians alike that paved the way for this dominance in the first place. To understand how the British seized control of India, we must travel back to New Year's Eve 1600. Deep into the reign of Elizabeth I, it was her signature on a royal charter granted to a group of adventure merchants, later known as the East India Company, that changed the destinies of two nations forever. Ironically, the company's leaders weren't initially interested in trading with the reigning Indian power. Instead, they focused on competing with the Dutch, French, and Portuguese in the East Indies. However, after being driven out of the East Indies, the company shifted its focus squarely onto the Indian subcontinent. In 1640, a company representative secured a grant of land in southern India, a pivotal moment marking the first time Indian land was owned directly by the English. On this site, they constructed Fort St. George, the seat of a settlement that grew into the thriving city of Madras, now known as Chennai and home to over 7 million people. As company-owned forts and settlements proliferated across the subcontinent, the English became leading exporters of spices. In the words of Brian Gardner, author of the East India Company, spices held a considerable place in life. Men were prepared to die for them, and many did. Wealth was measured in spices, and being well supplied was the ultimate mark of status. By the 17th century, the French, Danish, and Dutch were similarly active in Indian affairs, joining the already established Portuguese. As the 18th century commenced, Europeans became increasingly emboldened to intervene. They could afford to because the Mughal Empire, which once ruled the majority of India and parts of modern-day Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh, was on a steep decline. Exhausted by costly wars of conquest, the Mughals suffered repeated invasions. In 1739, the Persian ruler Nader Shah sacked the capital of Delhi following the decisive Battle of Kurnool. By 1748, Nader Shah's protege, the Afghan Ahmed Shah Durrani, led his own armies into Mughal territory. Consequently, by the mid-18th century, the Mughal emperor was reduced to a mere figurehead for empowered local rulers. Yet, as the Mughals weakened, the Maratha kingdom in central western India carved out an empire of its own, remaining a dominant power for another 80 years. Amidst this chaos, the East India Company began to eclipse its European rivals. They poured substantial profits into raising a private army to contend with the Marathas and Bengal. Benefiting from a formidable navy that ferried more men to India than any competitor, the company's growth was fueled by more than just gunpowder. Their laissez-faire policy won over many local rulers, who profited financially and did not yet perceive their sovereignty to be at risk. Of all the Europeans in India, the British and French were now preeminent. But under the daring Robert Clive, the British East India Company's army crushed both the Bengalis and their French allies at the Battle of Plassey during the 7 Years' War. By the 1760s, the British asserted unchecked control over much of the subcontinent through direct possession or tributary arrangements. While the Treaty of Paris in 1763 returned some forts to the French, they never recovered, and the French East India Company collapsed 6 years later. As the British advanced into the heartland, they met staunch resistance from the Sikh Empire and other states uninterested in English business. The Duke of Wellington, who would later defeat Napoleon, secured several victories against these states while aiding his brother, Richard Wellesley, the Governor-General of India. By the turn of the 19th century, the Wellesley brothers had laid the foundations of an empire greater even than that of Akbar himself. As the mid-19th century approached, an Indian national consciousness began to take shape. Company rule led to demands for social and economic reforms from increasingly alienated local rulers. These tensions exploded in the Indian Rebellion of 1857, also known as the Sepoy Mutiny. The rebellion was brutally suppressed, resulting in the formal dissolution of the Mughal Empire and the transfer of power from the East India Company directly to the British Crown. India's resources and the livelihoods of its people were subsequently exploited to fuel Britain's Industrial Revolution, leading to devastating famines that left millions dead and shook the Indian economy to its core. One thing was certain: the British Empire now had millions of new subjects, and its imperial expansion would not stop there. Ultimately, the political vacuum left by the Mughals, the failure of the Maratha Empire to unify India, the defeat of European rivals, Britain's military superiority, and the strategic policies of the East India Company allowed Britain to successfully seize the entire Indian subcontinent.